Hello and welcome to Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin and today with me is Byron Crellin, CEO of Debt Squared Group. Welcome to you, Byron.
Hi, Stephen.
Byron, we did a Property Matters programme earlier in the year and we discussed at the time really the trauma of what was happening in the commercial world of property, what it was doing to rents, what it was doing to landlords, what it was doing to tenants.
Yes.
So I thought it's perhaps time, now we seem to be coming out of the major restrictions on the pandemic anyway, to sort of just review where we are in the commercial property market. And I thought we'd start off with your view of the different geographical areas, whether London, for instance, is suffering more than perhaps Manchester or vice versa, Birmingham. What's your view?
You've led me very nicely there.
Right.
So Q2 stats tell us there are over 650,000 businesses in severe distress. So that is bordering on either absolutely insolvent or bordering on insolvency. And that's a scary stat. It's an increased number. By region, the information is not readily available, so you have to tap into your network of insolvency practitioners and put all their data together. But what is conclusive from the information that we track and we see and we collate and we report into our clients is that actually London is the most vulnerable, and that's probably, you know, maybe not a surprise for a lot of people. Hospitality actually saw a bounce back, and that's because businesses were starting to able to move again, and I think people got confidence and started to recruit, etc., as they were coming out of lockdown and reopening. Hospitality in London, though, is push London into the vulnerable sector, and that's at the bottom of the table in terms of if this was a health review of the UK, then London is quite a sick patient. But as we're getting businesses back open, it will bounce back.
Yes, I mean, obviously in the city of London, for instance, you know, the hospitality industry there is driven by the sort of sandwich bars, the coffee bars, and the and the workers coming out of the offices and fraternising in those sort of places. So that's obviously taken a huge hit, and I just wonder how long it will take for office operations to return to normal, or whether this sort of stay at home.
I don't think we will go back to a pre-COVID everyone's back to work.
Don't you really?
Well, obviously I can't name names, but you know, we represent a diverse number of clients, and the general trend is you will basically be in the office 2 days, 3 days a week maximum, and that will be hot desk setup. So I've got one particular client that is actually across the UK has said to all of its employees, not work from home, work where you want.
That's interesting.
And what they've done is they're now moving all of their offices from this is my desk, this is where I work, to your desk is now a locker, and in that locker is your apparatus. And when you arrive in the office on a day that you want to work in the office, you go to your locker. You've probably got your laptop with you anyway, but you'll take out your whatever office stationery that you require, your favourite mug, and then you'll position yourself where you want to in that office.
But isn't this going to be catastrophic for the sort of institutional landlords? Because, you know, I'm thinking, for instance, here in Canary Wharf, there's a lot of very high power sort of solicitors, offices and banks. Now, if you go in one of the bank buildings that I can think of here, they've got a swimming pool, they've got hairdressers, they've got their own restaurant, they've got everything else, and they're huge investment in the real estate.
Yeah.
And if that's not going to get used, they're going to want to move, aren't they?
Absolutely, and I think, you know, they did that, and there are organisations out there, and again, you know, I can think of 2 or 3 that we're close with, and they'll do your dry cleaning for you, you know, and it's part of, you know, employee retention, etc. Sure. And absolutely, totally applaudable. I think they're having to rethink what their dynamics are in terms of staff retention, because you've got now competitors that are saying, well, you don't have to come into the office. You only come into the office to meet a client. We've got one particular client that's got 4 offices in the northwest. They've made one as the central office. Any client meetings, any training will be done at one office. The other offices now are just hot desks. And I think the issue that we've got, we talked about sort of the sandwich shops across the UK that have survived and been very successful, and dry cleaners very successful on stations, outside, Canary Wharf and offices, etc. I'm frequently in Birmingham, and I can remember a sandwich shop that's still there, and it's been there for 20 years, and it's but I think now they're probably scratching their heads because the footfall's not there, and I think there is a knock-on effect. I sit on a number of committees, and one of those committees is about bringing London back to life, getting businesses back open, etc. And one of the concerns is that businesses, big offices, won't come back to 100% capacity. There are banks that are saying to employees, you will be back full time in the office, this is the date. I think that's an interesting stance, because I think you're putting yourself out there, and setting a marker, and you've got potential market competitors, whatever space you're in, that will look to incentivise and win people over by giving them those kind of initiatives. I recently read an article, and it was an employee challenging this work from home, and they said, you want me to come into the office 2 days, 3 days a week? I've got an Oyster card, but I'm not getting a discount. I'm having to pay full whack,
rate, yeah.
for to get in for what is 30% now of my working.
But I think the government have done something on that, haven't they? They've made these sort of flexi tickets mandatory now for the rail companies.
Yeah.
But no, I take that point. I mean, if I can use, I'm not a commercial property person. I tend to have specialised in residential throughout my life, so I can only sort of equate to that. And one of the things that I noticed in the pandemic and the lockdowns was that country agents were saying, oh, we're so busy, we've got a huge influx of people wanting to leave London or Manchester or whatever, coming to the country, and we're so busy, it's a huge exodus. Well, yeah, yes and no. You might have a top agent here, is saying Canary Wharf, selling perhaps 30 properties a week. That country agent might be selling 2. Yeah. So if he sells 3, business is 30% of it.
I need to recruit more staff.
Yeah. So I'm just rather sceptical of these sort of panic stats that we're getting.
I've made an absolute statement to myself to say, stop reading stats and then trying to break that stat down to what does that mean? Because it sends you either into panic mode, self-defense mode, or excitement to go, oh, it's all over, everything's great in the world again. And we are such on a bumpy road, and I think it's very difficult. If you just analyse residential stock and the movement and the conversion of is rent versus purchase higher, and is that because of COVID, people don't want to buy, or are people being braver and going, no, it's the best thing to do now is borrow money. And I think it's so heads and tails in anything you look at. We look at commercial market space, and we look at retail, and when we look at retail by Geographical, and we look at business startups versus business failures to help our clients understand the price of a square footage for new rentals, and it's just a zigzag line. There is no real trend, and I think we just, we said it on a previous show, we've just got to accept what we've got and trade through this to try and get some trend.
Yeah. But coming back to this office business, I can remember some years ago working for a very, very smart firm of chartered surveyors in the West End of London, and it gave me immense pride to go in the offices there. It was right in the West End. There were super offices. It was great presence. We used to love having clients in because they were very impressed. I'd hate to see all that presence lost.
It's interesting. We our database is populated by surveyors, and surveyors require CPDs as part of their working life, and they have to have so many hours, 20 hours a year to complete. And we've been delivering CPDs for surveyors on select topics, market trends, etc., for as long as I've been in the market space. And the traditional CPD would be you go to an office and you would basically have a breakfast CPD. Bacon sandwiches are over there, coffee's there, so you get their attention because they're in for the bacon sandwich, obviously plus our content. We deliver a CPD, break, a little bit of a quick network, and then everybody goes back to work. But that's their morning, sort of 8 o'clock till 10:30. CPDs now are teams. You know, we delivered to 2,500 people in the last 2 months, professional surveyors, CPDs. Each one's been by a Teams. And, you know, we're now used to the scenario of if anybody's got a question, just highlight the hand on the Teams emoji screen so we know that you've got a question.
Right, okay.
2 years ago, you're in the office with a client and you're talking to them, and that's how CPD used to run, and dynamically changing.
And your preference?
It's good to pound the flesh. It's good to see people. I think it's just nice to get in front of people and get more engagement.
I mean, Property TV, we tried to keep going through the pandemic and the lockdowns, and we were reasonably successful because we could isolate the studio and make various sort of informative programs. But you do miss that contact and the sort of vigour it gives to your conversation and your subject matter.
I came down on the train today, Stephen, and my carriage was 6-7 people in it. More expensive to travel on train at the moment to get down to London. So it frustrates me because
I think again, you know, one of the subjects we've looked at several times is whether, you know, the infrastructure projects such as HS2 still have the same value sort of post-COVID. Really, I don't know.
I think we're conditioned now to go, I can actually do this from my car, from my home, from a hot desk at one of our offices across the UK.
I can remember being quite shocked the other week actually. So I was on a Zoom call with somebody. I said, "Well, where are you?" And he said, "I'm in my car." You know, and it's coming up on the car screen. You go, you know. Anyway, there we are. Look, Byron, we'll go to a break now. But after the break, what I'd like to talk about is a little bit about the retail side of the commercial property market, and perhaps how the government is at least offering a bit of help to some of the tenants and landlords. So join Byron and myself after the break. Look forward to seeing you then. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin, and with me is Byron Crellin, CEO of Debt Squared Group. Now, Byron, before the break, I said we'd want to talk about retail. Retail, I suppose, has had really bad publicity over the last 18 months, 2 years, for a number of reasons. We've had big groups shutting down shops. We've had big family name stores closing down. I'm thinking of things like House of Fraser and Debenhams. Those
traditional landmarks,
household names, haven't they? Yeah. I'm guessing that COVID has just merely added to those woes in the high street. What's the sort of percentage of rental debt in the high street now? Is it as bad as the papers make out?
Yeah, I mean, overall, we've got £6 billion worth of rent in the market in arrears as a result of COVID. Breaking that down into rent arrears, the government have just recently completed their call for evidence consultation document programme, and we've just started to circulate that into our clients. And it's interesting because you've got tenants that claim that they've got arrears that are X amount, but landlords through the consultation are reporting a different amount, considerably higher. The two parties aren't in tune, and does that surprise us? Possibly not. There are certain pockets of the UK that have been hit harder. If you know, I'm not going to point the finger at a particular town or etc. That would be wrong of me. But it doesn't take too long to do some research and find that certain towns that have been predominantly made up by smaller local retailers rather than the bigger brands, the traditional brands that we know, they've become ghost towns because those businesses have not survived or have managed to get through, but are saddled with debt, absolutely saddled with debt, and are now reopening, and they've got to recruit because they've lost staff, or they've got to get the confidence for people to come back. And I think people are shopping more now. I think people are doing that. But I think, and again, in the whole overarching looking at retail, there's a traditional well-known brand that was well known for its chocolate, and they've moved online. They've closed all of their retail stores across the UK and have just gone online, and that's a scary fact to see that happening, because we know that the big animals online are just buying a car now is online, and you can have it for 7 days, and if you don't like the colour of it, send it back.
I went through that 2 years ago. I was looking at a new car, and they said, "Oh, well, why don't you go into our virtual showroom?" So I sort of did. I always wanted to sort of thump the table and thought, "Look, I just want to look at a car." I don't want to see another video. I don't want another lecture. I just want to see it.
Yeah, and I think that's us trying to understand what post-COVID looks like. How does the retail market look like? But also getting used to what does 2023 look like. We are constantly sort of on the move because we're in a reactive industry space, and we're seeing even sort of technology take over. I mean, the traditional looking after a void property for us in the high street is that we're the key holder, and we go to the property and inspect it and check it, etc. And there is growing trends of, why do you need a key for a property? So I left my house this morning, jumped in the car to go to the station. How did I unlock the car? I used a fob.
Well, I saw one of your security videos, and you're almost using sort of, how can I best describe, ground-based drones to circulate commercial properties and guard them at night.
But there are lots of companies out there doing what we're doing. But our CCTV, £800 million worth of client assets every minute, 7 days a week, under watch. I mean, it's Big Brother. It is Big Brother. But in terms of retail, what does it look like, and sort of void space versus businesses coming back to life through this pandemic? And I think I've mentioned this on a previous show that we've done, that the Crellin household started using the local butcher, and even in the COVID, it was two in, only, and that was it. And then you go in, when one person comes out. Weekend just gone at the butchers, and it's not two in now. It's sort of like but they are manically busy, and they just said, well, our concern now is that actually people will drift away from us and go back to the traditional superstore, because I can get all of my food shopping on a big Friday shop or something, But I think what they're hoping for is that traditional quality outweighs the big brand. Park there, free parking, and you can do all of it in an hour.
Well, I mean, I think it's a little bit like we referred to the sort of coffee bars and snack bars that operate in the city, which are to a degree the lifeblood of the city, aren't they? And
they're mini communities, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And people here were saying, can't wait to get back in this cafe or that cafe or the other, and sort of just have the normal interaction of a normal working day. And I think to a degree shopping's a little bit the same. Yep, sure. I mean, I'm quite a big online customer. It's just very convenient. It's very fast. I can get whatever I want without having to trek around town looking for it. But nevertheless, I would still enjoy some of the shopping experiences, perhaps on Regent Street or Oxford Street or down in Knightsbridge that just really are a bit special.
Yeah. I mean, that's...
And that drives it, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
I mean, you've just named 3 streets, and, you know, that's, you know, a wonderful sort of Christmas experience. You know.
But you know, when we did our earlier program at the beginning of the year, I think it was, I was saying to you, you know, Oxford Street's beginning to look like sort of tumbleweed city a bit.
Well, it was interesting. I was down for a client meeting, stayed central London, and we're on the back of Regent Street, and came out at 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning to get a taxi back to Euston, and Regent Street at 10:30 felt like a Sunday afternoon. Very quiet, concerningly quiet. But I think that's also people not quite comfortable to get on a train. As I say, like I came down this morning
That's
and,
true.
you know...
Did you wear your mask on the train?
I did. I walked on to the train with my mask on.
Okay.
And then I realised nobody was around me. I took it off. And then a lady got on at Crewe, and I put it back on. But I walked across Euston, and what was quite pleasing was for the 50, 60, 70 commuters that were on the concourse waiting for their trains, 90% had masks on,
Yeah, well,
that was encouraging.
It is encouraging. I mean, I was just watching the news this morning, and people were saying that it's a factor of ×8 in terms of saving infection.
I mean, I think I've got used to it.
Yeah, I have.
I hated it to begin with, because it was sort of, I suppose, imposed on me to go, you've got to wear your mask.
But since the SARS breakdown in China and the Chinese colonies, the sort of Asia Pacific Rim people have been wearing masks for 10 years now, more.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to sort of smile when I saw them over here, but actually there's a lot of sense to it, isn't there?
I think we can learn from it.
Just why not?
Absolutely.
You know.
Yeah.
There we are. All right. Well, look, coming to the future, what we've got to think about is whether we have to take steps or whether the government has to take steps to soften the blow of the economic stress all this has caused. Are there any government schemes still available to help a landlord or a tenant?
I think what remains in place is the government restriction on landlords to prevent evictions from happening, so evicting their commercial tenants. And we have that ring fence. We've also got a ring fence around commercial rent arrears.
Okay.
And that's all in play right up to the end of March 2022. So I know we did a programme recently, and we had John Howard on, and you know, as a landlord, you know, he was head and hands on the desk. You know, when I mentioned March 2022,
I wouldn't worry too much about John. I think he does okay.
And I'm sure his tenants love him. And for me, you know, what the government has just recently done through their consultation is asked all of the market spaces. So they've gone to tenants, they've gone to landlords, they've gone to managing agents, they've come into the enforcement market space and said, you know, they've gone to citizens' advice and said, right, here's a set of questions. You know, we want your opinion, and we can then try and calculate if there is a trend that all parties would accept of what the future 2022 potentially could look like. Unfortunately, what came out of that consultation was they want this, they want that. And I think the government have got a real challenge. The one thing that the government have said is that they want to introduce new legislation, arbitration, that forces a landlord and tenant to talk. And that means if there's arrears, and again, we don't know the details, so I'm sort of in danger of surmising, but what we're reading is that the government are saying if you've got arrears, before you take an action through a court process or through debt squared enforcement activity, you'll have to go through a process of arbitration where you'll engage with a tenant.
Well, look, I think, you know, I've been involved with the court system for the last 16 years or so, and I although my role was dealing with purely criminal work, I am quite interested in this sort of commercial litigation and process. And I've often thought, although it's a question that's asked when you start any kind of litigation, have you been to arbitration? I think it should be a mandatory part of the process. And the answer is, if you haven't been to arbitration, then you don't proceed with the court case. It would save a huge amount of time in court.
Yeah.
It would I think, surprise a lot of people how actually two people that have come to loggerheads are actually prepared to talk at the end of the day.
I agree if that is a pre-court measure, but at the moment, if we go back pre-COVID, a landlord-tenant relationship was driven by the terms of the commercial lease. If the tenant defaulted, then the landlord had a provision within the lease to use commercial rent arrears recovery, so they could engage and we could go to the property. We don't need a court order for that. It's the only piece of legislation which you can enforce a warrant without the application of a court.
Right.
So, and that works. That remedy that has been brought up to date, it was always deemed to be pre-CRA. The law of distress is archaic. An example to that was if you were holding goods as the bailiff, then and one of those items was belonged to a third party, then they would have to serve a declaration through the 1908 Act. Yeah, archaic. But
Stop.
today going forward,
Yeah.
different landscape.
Great.
And I think that we potentially will see movement and clarity coming out of the government between now and March.
Okay. Well, Byron Crellin, CEO of Debt Square Group, thank you so much for your contribution
Pleasure,
today.
Stephen. Thank
I'm
you.
sure our viewers will find that tremendously interesting and a really good insight into the commercial world of property. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So that's all for today's programme. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Matters.